Velna lay curled in a corner of the broken escape pod, arms wrapped tightly around Bix, her small, furry pet. The wind outside screamed like a dying beast. Snow and ice piled against the cracked window. The cold had no mercy, no end. Each breath came out as a puff of mist, and even that was growing weaker. Her ship had crashed 2 days ago. No signal. No heat. No food, except for a few dry rations that had frozen solid. Velna had tried everything. The emergency beacon was smashed. Her comms unit sparked once, then died for good. She knew what that meant. No one was coming. She was too far from home, and no one even knew she was here. Bix trembled in her arms, giving off a soft whimper. She stroked his fur gently, whispering in her native language. "We'll sleep soon, Bix. We'll dream of warmth, of stars, better places." The last of the pod's power faded with a quiet click. The dim light above her head flickered out. Darkness took over. The cold grew worse. She stopped feeling her toes. Her fingers had gone numb an hour ago. Her skin felt tight, her thoughts heavy. Even fear began to fade. She was slipping away, and part of her welcomed it. No more pain, no more waiting then. Sound it was faint at first, a soft crunch. Then another, like metal pressing into frozen snow. Not the wind, not ice. Steps Velna didn't move. Another crunch, then a glow. Orange, and flickering. Fire. No, something like it. A torch. A figure appeared through the storm. Tall, wrapped in strange armor. A helmet covered his face, a small light on the side of it cutting through the snow like a knife. She blinked, unsure if it was real or a dream. The figure stopped outside. The broken pod looked down at her through the shattered glass, then slowly stepped inside. Steam rose from his armor. He moved with care, not like a soldier, but like someone used to danger. Velna tensed. Her body wanted to run, but it couldn't. Move. The figure dropped to one knee. He pulled off his glove and placed a warm, bare hand gently against her face. Her skin twitched at the sudden heat. His voice came out low and calm, words she didn't understand. She looked into his eyes, brown, tired but kind. Then everything went black. She woke later to warmth. Real warmth. She lay under thick blankets. On something soft, a light hummed above her, soft and steady. The air no longer bit at her skin. She was alive. Bix was next to her, asleep but breathing. His fur twitched now and then, his paws curled like he was dreaming. She sat up slowly. Her muscles ached. His fingers burned from returning blood. But she was alive. The room was small, made of metal and rock. A heater in the corner glowed orange. Tools lined one wall. A strange machine buzzed in the corner, human tech. Old but working. Across the room, the man sat on a crate, helmet off now. His face was rough and bearded. A long scar crossed his left cheek. He looked tired but not unfriendly. When he saw her move, he smiled slightly. Velna tried to speak, but her throat was dry. He stood and walked over, offering her a warm drink. It smelled strange, but she sipped it. The heat filled her chest like a fire. He pointed at himself. "Human," he said slowly. She frowned. He tried again. "Human." She pointed at him. "Human," she said weakly. He nodded. Then she pointed. "To herself, Velna." He smiled again. "Velna," he repeated. Then he nodded toward Bix. "What's his name?" She said it. "Bix." "Bix," he said softly, glancing at the creature. Cute little guy. Yeah. They didn't understand each other's language, but names were a start. For the next hour, he worked on something in the corner, an old radio. He kept turning dials, tapping it, frowning. She watched silently. Every now and then, she saw him whisper something when the static changed. Always the same name, Emma. Who was Emma? Why was a human here, alone, on this frozen world? And why did he save her? So many questions filled her head, but for now, only one thing mattered. She wasn't alone anymore. Someone had found her. Someone had saved her, and that meant she might still have a chance. Asterisk Velna didn't sleep much that night. Even though the warmth of the underground shelter made her body relax, she kept her eyes on the human who saved her. He sat against the far wall, working on a strange device. With blinking lights and metal wires, his face stayed serious, his fingers steady. There was a quiet sadness about him, like he had seen too many bad things and didn't expect good things anymore. Bix lay beside her, curled into a soft pile of blankets, breathing slowly. The little creature had warmed up quickly and seemed to trust the human. That helped Velna feel a little safer, but her mind was still full of questions. She wanted to ask him where they were, why he had come for her, and how long he had been living in this place. But every time she opened her mouth, the words caught in her throat. He didn't speak her language, and she didn't speak his. At one point, he looked up from his work and gave her a quiet nod. Then he went back to turning dials and watching small screens. The radio he worked on gave out bursts of static and broken noise. Every now and then, a sound came through, just a few seconds of something that almost sounded like a voice, but it was never clear, and every time, the man would stop and whisper one name into the radio softly and with care. Like saying it wrong might break him. Emma.Velna didn't know who Emma was, but she could see the pain in his eyes when no answer came. He didn't show fear, he didn't show anger. It's this deep, quiet hurt that made the room feel heavier. She looked around the shelter. It was built from metal and stone, buried deep. Under the frozen surface of the planet, pipes ran across the ceiling, some hissing with steam. A few solar batteries blinked with power, and storage crates held old supplies, some tools, some medical items. This place had been lived in for a long time. It wasn't new, and it wasn't temporary. Velna began to realize something. This man wasn't just passing through. He lived here. He had made a home in this icy place, away from the rest of the galaxy. But why? The next morning, he motioned for her to eat. The food was bland, but warm, and her body welcomed it. He sat across from her, not speaking, just watching her closely to make sure she was all right. Then he stood and walked to a panel in the wall. With a loud pull, he opened a heavy door and pointed outside. Velna shook her head. The cold was death out there. She had no suit, no gear. But the human had already picked up a second coat from a hook, smaller than his, and handed it to her. He wasn't asking her to go out alone. He was taking her somewhere. She followed him outside. The cold slammed into her like a wall, but the coat helped, and the man gave her a heated scarf that wrapped around her face.
The world outside was
white, endless, and cruel. Sharp winds tore across frozen ground, and snowflakes fell like tiny blades. The sun was weak behind gray clouds. She stayed close to him as he led the way. They walked across the ice for nearly an hour. No words, just the crunch of their boots and the howl of the wind. Finally, they reached a hill of snow and twisted metal. A broken ship lay half buried. In the ground, it was not her ship. It was human. He stepped inside through a small hatch and motioned for her to follow. Inside was dark, cold, and quiet. Machines sat dead. Lights blinked once in a while, but most had gone dark.
Ow.
This ship had crashed here long ago. He walked through the wreckage, showing her a wall covered with photos and small objects. Pictures of smiling people, a child holding a dog, a woman standing by a lake, a family. He touched one picture and closed his eyes for a second. Velna stepped closer. She looked at the photo. The woman in it had dark hair and kind eyes. She was holding the hand of a man, the same man who had saved her. He had looked younger then, happier. She looked at him, trying to understand, looked back, his eyes saying everything his voice could not. This woman, Emma, was important. Maybe the most important person he had ever known. And she was gone. Velna felt her chest tighten. She reached out and gently touched his arm. For a few seconds, they stood in silence, surrounded by broken metal and memories. Then he turned and showed her the main engine room. It was partly destroyed, but some parts were still working. He pointed to a power core that still glowed faintly. He needed it, maybe to repair something back in the shelter. Maybe the radio. Maybe even a ship. They worked together. She handed him tools, helped clear frozen panels, and followed his lead. He was patient, never raising his voice, always careful to show her what to do. Didn't treat her like a child. He treated her like a partner. When they finally stepped outside again, the wind had calmed a little. The snow still fell, but not as hard. They carried the power core back between them, one side in his arms, one in hers. Bix ran ahead of them, barking happily at the falling flakes. As they neared the shelter again, Velna suddenly stopped, turned back to look at the frozen horizon behind them. Something had changed. She didn't know what, but she felt it. The human saw her face and followed her gaze. Out there in the distance, barely visible through the snow, a strange shape moved. Across the ice, and it was coming their way. Asterisk. The shape on the ice was slow at first, almost hard to notice through the falling snow. Velna squinted, thinking maybe it was just another broken part of the landscape. But it was moving. The human saw it too. Didn't speak, but his body stiffened in a way she understood instantly. This wasn't just a passing animal or falling debris. This was danger. Without wasting time, he motioned for Velna to hurry. She picked up the pace, holding tight to the power core they had brought back from the wreck. Bix darted between them, sensing the sudden tension. The wind picked up again, colder now, sharper, a kind of cold that didn't just cut skin it. Warned you that something worse was coming? By the time they reached the hidden door of the shelter and slipped inside, Velna's legs were shaking. The human sealed the entrance quickly, locked it with metal bars, and shut off the exterior beacon. The inside lights dimmed slightly as he rerouted power, then he moved fast through the room, grabbing a long object from the wall. It looked like a weapon, but different from the kind she had seen in military broadcasts or training videos. This one was handmade, patched together with parts from different eras and styles. Old tech. Personaltech.Velna watched him check the weapon, reload something at the back, and stare at the monitor near the door. He tapped it, then frowned. The screen showed a grainy, flickering image. For a second, they both saw it clearly. Not one shape. 3, tall, thin, walking in strange patterns, wearing no protective gear. In the freezing wind, they moved without effort, as if the planet's deathly cold meant nothing to them. Their heads twitched left and right like they were sniffing, or scanning, or both. Velna felt her heart beating faster. She had never seen creatures like that before. Even Bix crouched low and gave a soft growl. The human turned to her and pointed at a ladder that led to the lower level. She didn't argue. She picked up Bix and climbed down into the shadows while he stayed above. She heard him checking weapons, moving quietly, shutting off any sound that might give them away. Down below, Velna waited in the dark. The space was tight, made of stone and cold metal. She wrapped her arms around Bix and tried to listen through the walls. She could hear the wind howling louder now, pressing against the outside of the shelter like it was trying to peel it. Apart, then came a new sound, scraping. It moved along the outside wall. A slow drag of metal against metal, or maybe claws against steel. She covered Bix's mouth gently as he whimpered. Above her, she could hear the human moving, his boots pressing slowly against the floor. Suddenly the shelter shook. Not an explosion. More like something large had jumped onto the roof. Dust fell from the ceiling. A loose piece of pipe clanged behind her. She held her breath. The human was above, standing still now, gun pointed toward the hatch. She saw a flicker of his shadow as he positioned himself between the door and the ladder. Then silence again. It stretched long. It was painful, like the world was holding its breath with them. A sharp bang echoed through the metal. One of the creatures had slammed its hand, or whatever it used against the door. Another strike. The human didn't flinch. Another, then it stopped. No more banging, no footsteps. No sounds at all. Velna waited, unsure if it was safe, unsure if they had left. Her hands gripped Bix so tightly she felt his heart beat through his fur. He didn't move. He knew better. A minute passed. Then another, and then something worse than sound. a voice that came through the shelter walls, loud, but clear enough to freeze her in place. It spoke in broken words, not hers, not the humans, but a mix of both. It wasn't a voice from a throat, it was metallic, artificial. The words scratched the air. "We know you are here. Come out. We will not hurt you." Velna looked up, eyes wide. The voice was wrong. It didn't sound like a living creature. It sounded like something using stolen language, like it had heard just enough to copy and twist. She could hear the human moving now, fast. He shut off the lights, upstairs, and slid a panel over the main window. More silence. The voice didn't. "Come again?" Instead, the monitor blinked off. No power loss. No static. Just gone. Velna held her breath again. She wanted to believe they were safe, that the creatures were leaving. But something told her that wasn't true. These things hadn't come to explore. They had come for him, not for her. Not for Bix, for the human, and he knew it. He came down the ladder a few minutes later, his face pale and jaw tight. He looked at her, not with fear, but with decision. He pointed at himself, then made a walking motion with his fingers. Then he pointed to her and Bix, and made a closed circle with his hands. He was going to lead them away. He didn't say it. But she understood. He had been found, and now he was going to be hunted. The escape wasn't loud, but it was fast. Before the first light of morning reached the frozen sky, the human had already packed supplies into 2 old backpacks. Velna didn't ask questions. She followed his lead, tying her coat tighter, wrapping Bix into a sling made of soft fabric, and taking one last look around the shelter. This place had saved her life. But now, it was no longer safe. The human opened a hidden panel near the rear wall and revealed a narrow passage. It was a tunnel carved through rock and reinforced with scrap metal and support beams. It didn't look like it had been used in years. Dust clung to the floor, and frost spread along the walls like a silent warning. The human switched on a small light clipped to his jacket and nodded at her to stay close. They moved quickly but carefully. The tunnel stretched for what felt like miles, twisting and branching off into dead ends and sealed doors. Velna kept glancing back, her ears tuned for the slightest sound behind them. Nothing followed, not yet. But something about the silence was wrong. It wasn't calm. It felt like a trap waiting to close. Hours passed before they reached a hatch. At the far end, the human pressed his hand to a scanner, and after a few slow clicks, it opened into a deep ice cave. This one was different. It wasn't man-made. The walls shimmered faintly with strange symbols carved into the crystal blue ice. Some pulsed with soft light, like they were still alive. Velna stared. These were not human markings. They were older, shaped in long loops and dots. She reached out without thinking, her fingers brushing one of the glowing symbols. It pulsed under her touch, then faded. The human stepped beside her, not surprised. He watched her reaction closely, then he walked ahead deeper into the cave. The temperature dropped again. Frost clung to their eyebrows and gloves. Even Bix shivered despite being tucked inside warm fabric. But they kept moving, guided by the flickering marks and the human's memory. At last, they reached the center of the cave. A chamber opened before them, massive and still. In the middle stood a tall pillar of ice, clear and smooth, and inside. It, frozen in perfect stillness, was a massive machine. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a ship. It was something older. Velna stepped closer, her breath caught in her throat. The machine inside the ice looked like a mixture of organic and metal, parts shaped like a tree with wide, flat branches. Symbols ran along its arms, same ones they had seen along the cave walls. She turned to the human, eyes full of questions. He set the backpack down and pulled out a small device. It looked like a scanner, but more advanced than anything she had seen. He pressed it to the ice and waited as it blinked red. After a few seconds, it turned green. Then he pointed at her. At first, she didn't understand. He pointed again. This time, he placed his hand on his own chest, then on hers, then gestured to the ice. She stepped forward slowly, her hand shaking. She placed her palm against the frozen surface. The reaction was instant. A loud hum rolled through the cave. Light burst from the frozen machine, shining through the ice like sunlight through glass. The symbols on the walls flared with brightness. The ground beneath her feet vibrated. She pulled her hand back, eyes wide with fear. The human held her arm gently and whispered something soft, calm. He didn't seem scared. He had expected this. That was when she realized he hadn't brought her here just to escape. He had brought her here for this. Before she could speak, before she could ask anything, a sound echoed through the tunnel they had just left. The scraping had returned. But this time, it was louder and closer. The human grabbed his weapon and turned to face the entrance. Velna stayed behind, holding Bix tightly, eyes fixed on the path ahead. The first creature stepped into the cave, tall and thin, black skin like polished stone, red eyes glowing without emotion. It moved without sound, its head twitching from side to side, taking in everything at once. Then another followed, a third. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They knew she had touched the machine. They knew something had. It's been activated, and they were not going to let it continue. The human raised his weapon. The air grew colder. The machines in the ice hummed louder. Velna felt something new deep inside her chest. Not fear, not panic. It was like a call. The light from the ice machine reached toward her like a living thing. She looked back once at the human. He gave a small nod, not of command, but of trust. He was going to fight. She was going to run, because the machine wasn't. Finished waking up, and neither was she, asterisk. The cave exploded into chaos. The first shot came from the human. His weapon screamed with heat and light as it struck the lead creature square in the chest. The impact sent the thing stumbling back, but not down. It barely reacted. Its red eyes locked on him like it didn't feel pain at all. The others charged forward without a sound. The human fired again, stepping sideways, keeping his body between them and Velna. His movements were practiced, sharp. The kind of fighting that came from experience, not training manuals. He moved like someone who had fought for his life more than once. But these weren't soldiers. They didn't move like anything human. They glided across the floor, bending around ice columns and swinging long. Razored limbs, Velna turned back toward the frozen machine. The pillar of ice around it was melting now, fast and uneven. Steam hissed through the cracks as bright. Blue light poured out in waves. The machine inside was waking up, responding to something inside her. The symbols on the walls kept flashing, faster, brighter. She reached out and placed her hand against one of them. It burned cold against her skin, but she didn't pull away. Behind her, the human shouted something she couldn't understand. Then a sharp cry of pain. She turned and saw him drop to one knee. One of the creatures had sliced through his jacket, blood spreading across the fabric. He fired again, hitting the thing in the head. It fell back, twitching, but didn't stay down. Velna made her choice. She ran toward the ice pillar, climbed onto the base, and placed both hands against the melting surface. A blinding pulse of energy exploded outward. The cave shook. The walls cracked. Light filled the chamber, reaching into every corner. The machine inside the ice flared to life, its long branches unfolding slowly, glowing with power that had slept for centuries. The creatures stopped moving. For the first time, they hesitated. Velna felt a rush of thoughts not her own, a flood of memories that didn't belong to her. She saw flashes of tall, silver-skinned people standing in temples made of crystal and snow. She saw them kneeling before the same tree-shaped machine, speaking in the old tongue. Voices filled with hope and fear. She saw herself in their place. The light spread across her skin, wrapping around her arms like living threads. Her heart pounded. Not from fear, but from something older. The machine had chosen her, or maybe it had been waiting for someone like her all along. The creatures let out a high-pitched sound, shrill and violent. They moved again, faster now, sensing the shift. Human tried to stand, blood running down his side. He raised his weapon with one hand, the other pressed to his wound. His eyes met Velna's, and even through pain. He gave her a look that said one thing: don't stop. The light around her grew brighter. Then something happened she couldn't explain. The ground beneath the machine cracked open, revealing layers of blue metal and soft, pulsing veins of energy. The light flowed through the cracks, raced up the walls, and formed a wide dome around the chamber. The creatures slammed into it and bounced off, stunned. She dropped to her knees, overwhelmed. The machine pulsed once more, and then grew quiet. Outside the dome, the creatures waited. Inside, the humans stumbled forward, barely able to stand. She rushed to him, helping him sit against a stone slab. His face was pale, breathing shallow. He looked at her with tired eyes and gave a weak smile. Then he pointed at the machine behind her and managed a single word: key. Velna didn't understand at first, but when she looked back at the machine, she realized it wasn't finished. It was still changing. The tree-like structure was folding into itself, shrinking down until something small and glowing floated toward her. It landed gently in her hand. A crystal no bigger than her palm, pulsing with light. The human scanner, still strapped to his chest, gave a single clear tone. That tone wasn't random. It was a signal. Somewhere out there, something had heard it. Help, danger, or something. Far worse. It didn't matter. They weren't alone anymore. Velna closed her hand around the crystal. The creatures outside the dome pressed against the barrier, harder now, smarter, adjusting. The shield wouldn't last forever. She turned to the human. His lips were blue, his eyes starting to close. If they stayed here, he would die. She had power. Now, but to use it. She had to leave the cave and face the world outside that had already chosen her as its next enemy, or its next hope. Velna carried the glowing crystal close to her chest as she helped the human out of the cave. His steps were slow and unsteady, each movement painful. She wanted to ask if he could walk faster, but saw the deep lines of exhaustion and pain on his face. Instead, she stayed quiet and focused on the path ahead. Outside, the frozen world stretched. In all directions, the sun was low and weak behind heavy clouds, casting long shadows across the snow. The wind had died down, but the cold still bit through her thick coat. Bix padded quietly at her feet, watching her carefully. He seemed to understand this journey was far from over. The shield from the cave still held. The strange creatures had not followed them outside, but Velna could feel their presence in the air like dark clouds waiting for a storm. The human glanced back once, his eyes scanning the empty white horizon. He held the weapon tightly, but his hands shook. They needed shelter, but the underground cave was no longer safe. The crystal in Velna's hand pulsed with light, as if it wanted her to use it. She had learned in the cave that it was a key of some kind, ancient and powerful, but she did not know how to unlock its full strength or control it. As they moved forward, Velna noticed cracks in the ice underfoot, thin but growing. The planet itself seemed unstable, like it was dying even faster than before. Snow fell softly around them, but the air was filled with an electric charge that made her skin tingle suddenly. The human stopped and pressed his back against a large rock. He motioned for Velna to stay silent. She looked up to see 3 dark figures approaching from the distance, moving swiftly across the ice. They were the hunters. The same creatures from before, relentless and merciless. Velna's heart pounded. She tightened her grip on the crystal and pulled Bix closer. The human whispered something she couldn't understand but felt the urgency. In his voice, they ducked behind the rock, breath shallow, waiting. The creatures came closer, scanning the area with glowing red eyes. Their footsteps were silent, but Velna could hear their sharp breaths, the hiss of their cold lungs. One of them raised a strange device that emitted a low buzzing sound. It scanned the rock. Velna held her breath and felt the crystal grow warmer. In her hand, without warning, the human sprang forward, firing his weapon. The shots echoed loudly in the frozen silence. One creature staggered, but quickly recovered, charging toward them with deadly speed. Velna stepped out from behind the rock, crystal glowing bright. She raised her hand and focused on the power inside. The cold energy surged outward like a wave. The ice around the creatures cracked and exploded, sending shards flying. The hunters faltered, startled by the sudden blast. The human took advantage, firing again and again, pushing them back. Velna felt the crystal draining her energy. Her arms shook, her breath came faster, but she refused to stop. The creatures hissed in pain and rage, but could not move through the ice barrier. Finally, the hunters retreated into the swirling snow. Disappearing like shadows into the white wasteland, Velna collapsed onto the snow, exhausted. The human knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. He smiled weakly and nodded as if to say she had done well. They needed to keep moving. The crystal's power was strong, but fragile. If Velna pushed too hard, she might lose control. And if the hunters found them again, they would come better prepared. Together. They stood and continued across the ice planet, unsure what dangers awaited, but certain they could not stay still. The crystal pulsed softly in her hand, a beacon of hope in the endless cold. Velna's mind raced. What was this power? Could it save them both? And what price would she have to pay to unlock its secrets? Velna's legs ached from the long trek across the ice, but she refused to stop. The glowing crystal in her hand pulsed steadily, lighting their path through the endless white. The human beside her moved slower now, each step heavier than the last, yet his grip on her arm was firm, steady. They were close to something. She could feel it deep inside her chest, a stirring that grew with every heartbeat. The frozen world around them began to change. The harsh winds softened, and the snow underfoot shifted from hard ice to a thin layer of wet slush. Far ahead, jagged rocks broke the horizon, rising like broken teeth against the gray sky. Velna knew this was the edge of the planet's frozen heart. As they reached the rocks, the crystal's light intensified, filling the air with warmth and color. The ancient energy was awakening not just within her, but across the land. The ice cracked and melted, revealing patches of dark earth and strange green shoots breaking through the snow. Suddenly, from the shadows of the rocks, figures appeared. Not the cold alien hunters that had chased them, but other stall beings. With silver skin and calm eyes, they moved with grace, their voices gentle but powerful. They spoke in the same old language Velna had glimpsed in her visions, the language of her ancestors. One stepped forward and placed a hand on her forehead. Images flooded her mind, the history of the planet, the rise and fall of her people, and the ancient promise sealed within the crystal. They had been waiting for someone like her, a bridge between worlds, to awaken the power that could heal the planet and end the endless hunting. The human watched silently, his face filled with awe and relief. He whispered the name Emma again, and Velna understood. The woman in the photo had been part of this ancient story, a protector who believed in peace even in the darkest times. Together, Velna and the silver beings raised the crystal. Light spread from it, flowing through the land and the sky. The cold retreated, the ice melting into rivers that sang of new life. The hunters, sensing the shift, vanished into the shadows. Their threat ended by the power they could not fight. The human smiled, the pain fading from his eyes. Velna hugged Bix tightly, feeling the warmth of hope for the first time since the crash. She was no longer alone. She was part of something greater, a future, born from the past, saved by courage, trust, and the unbreakable bond between a girl, her pet, and the human who saved them both. As the sun broke through the clouds, shining on a world reborn, Velna knew their journey was only the beginning, but this time the ice would not hold them captive. They were free. Asterisk.